Hello, everyone, and this is your topic area 1 issues which affect participation in sport. And in today's lesson, we're going to look at user groups and the barriers that each user group face. Okay, so these are just some of the user groups, and if you've got your booklet in front of you, you can fill some of these out in your booklet. So, just going through these user groups, the ones that we need to pay particular attention to and remember is gender. We've got people from different ethnic minority groups. We've got retired people or over 65s. We've got families with children. We've got carers. We've got people with family commitments. We've got young children. We've got teenagers, people with disabilities, parents being singles or couples. We've got the employed or working people, and then we've got the unemployed or economically disadvantaged people. So looking at the pictures there, see which ones you can identify from the pictures, but ultimately you will need to remember all of those user groups when it comes to doing your exam. Okay. The next part of this video, we're going to look at some of the possible barriers that each one of these user groups may face. So let's look at gender to begin with. Gender can be categorized of being male or female, boy or girl, and different genders have different needs, goals, and requirements in order for them to take part in physical activity. Okay, so genders will face different barriers. Okay, and one of the first barriers that genders may face is stereotype. Okay, so in sport, there's an often stereotype that boys should play certain sports and girls should play certain sports, and it being less inclusive than it should be. Okay, so there's this idea that boys should play football and rugby, and girls should only do gymnastics and dance, and that's a barrier to a lot of boys and girls who particularly may not like rugby or football if they're a boy, or as a girl, they may not like gymnastics or dance, they may prefer rugby and football. So breaking down that stereotype could be a barrier. We've also got the barrier of a gender imbalance, where one gender is treated differently to another. Okay, so we see this predominantly in sport, but we also see this in the women's football game in comparison to the men's football. Men's football is huge on the back page of all the newspapers, all the social media. And although women's sport is growing, it is certainly not on the same level as the men's game at the minute. Okay, so there's definitely a barrier of gender imbalance. And thirdly is the lack of role models. Not having people to look up to aspire to be like, can cause a lack of participation. For example, again, females do not have particular rugby players or footballers that they can look up to. Although these role models are growing, they're not on the same level as some of the boys or the male role models that they have to look up to. Okay, so they're the barriers that gender could possibly face. Okay, and again, you should be looking in your booklet and filling out any possible barriers that you think match up to gender. Next one we're looking at is people from different ethnic minority groups. Okay, so ethnicity refers to the state of belonging of people who identify as each other based on culture, language, or tradition. Okay, so with there being many different ethnic backgrounds, there are many different barriers that those face. Okay, so if we look at this particular user group, some of the barriers that they face are a lack of awareness. Some ethnic minority groups may not know what sporting activities are available to them. Okay, so therefore do not take part in sport or leisure activities. There's also a lack of role models. There are very few role models from some particular ethnic minority groups. So at the moment, we don't have a Muslim Premier League footballer. So therefore, it will be a lack of role models for young Muslim boys and girls. Another ethnic minority group barrier would be the cultural norms. Okay, so interesting sports that are not offered in the local area. Okay, so that would be another one, or that would be known as lack of provision. And remember, we see provision as providing something, providing a facility or something like that, or an area to play the sport. Quite an obvious one, the next one. Ethnic minority groups have a fear of discrimination or racism. Okay, so there's potential discrimination for people at facilities or at football games or at rugby games or at cricket games or at athletics tracks where they face some kind of discrimination or racism. Okay. And over in this country, remember we're talking about sport in the UK here, some ethnic minority groups who play sport in England or in Scotland or in Wales cannot speak the language. So therefore it's not their first language. So therefore they might not be able to understand the rules or understand the coaches or even the referees. So there's a potential language barrier there as well. Okay. Thirdly, we're looking at retired or over 60s. So retirement's an option to stop working and then you start to receive a state pension. Okay, and retired people over 60s will face barriers taking part in sport. Okay, so the first barrier that we're going to talk about is possibly a lack of confidence. Okay, they may not have participated in sport for a long time, and it's difficult to restart playing a sport or doing some kind of leisure activity when you're retired or in your over 60s. But remember, this could be going out walking or swimming or joining the gym. Okay. They may have a lack of fitness. Okay, we associate retired people or over 60s having a basic fitness level and might not be able to perform some of the more strenuous physical activities. Okay, so how can we adapt sport so that they can? And then there may be a limited transport, and they may only have access to public transport at certain times, and they rely on bus routes or trains because they don't drive a car anymore. Okay, and obviously because they've stopped working, they're only receiving a state pension, which might not be as much as they previously earned in their job. They may have a lack of disposable income. Many retired people rely just on their state pension, and they only use it for their daily food, shopping, travel, etc. And they can't afford to use it on more luxury things like sport and activity and maybe a David Lloyd fitness gym. They can't afford that anymore. So there would be more barriers that they face. Thirdly, this is family commitments and parents. So commitments to commitments to family members can vary depending on people and how many children that they have. So there's potential childcare costs. Putting children in childcare is really expensive, and it can eat into an adult parent's leisure time. Potentially, the activity that they play in their own time as a parent may not offer a creche. At the sports centre or at the gym, they might not offer a free creche for the children to go in and play whilst they do some exercise. Potential transport issues, you may only have one car in the family. So if the children are off out doing their weekend activities or evening activities, that car's in use, so the other parent can't use it to go and do their sporting activities. Obviously, the main one, lack of time. Children take up a lot of your time, and parents prioritise spending time with their children. And lack of disposable income as well. A lot of children obviously take up a lot of cost, and it can be expensive to have children. So another barrier for them taking part in sport might be a lack of disposable income. Thirdly, carers. So carers can be adults or children that look after elderly people, parents, siblings, or anyone that's dependent on them. Okay, and again, carers will face some barriers to taking part in sport. Okay, so we've got their commitments. Carers have a commitment to kind of look after any one of those people, elderly parents, siblings, or anyone that they're dependent on. So if they've got that commitment, maybe they can't commit to some kind of sport or leisure activity in their own time. And again, it kind of links into the second point of having a lack of time. Caring for someone can take up time, and physical activity then has to take a step back because they have another individual who is reliant on them. Lack of disposable income. Carers may need to give up work to care for their family members, so they might not be able to work full time anymore because they're having to look after a parent, sibling, or elderly person. Okay, and finally, there might be a lack of appropriate activity options. So there may be only certain times that carers can play sport, and if they're looking after their person that's dependent on them, it might not suit with their schedule from week to week and day to day. So maybe a lack of appropriate activity options and timing. Next, we've got young children who are classed as primary school children, so from 11 to the day they were born. Barriers that they face: lack of role models. Children don't have loads of role models that they can look up to. So a child might not be able to encourage to play in their local clubs or local leagues. Lack of awareness, they don't know what clubs and activities are on around them in their local area. Obviously, children aren't bringing in an income, so a lack of disposable income. And they're reliant on their parents paying for things, and their parents can't always afford stuff. We've got lack of access to facilities, so children may not be allowed to travel on their own, and we're reliant on transport from the parents. Might have a negative attitude towards participation. We're seeing this more and more with kind of social media. People are more bothered about playing on their games, and some sports are not deemed cool, or some are seemed cooler than others. And then finally, we've got school and homework commitments. As a primary school student, you may have to prioritise doing some schoolwork and homework rather than prioritising some physical activity. Next group is teenagers. So teenagers from 12 to 18. Teenagers may face barriers just like young children, so very similar. Again, teenagers, lack of teenage role models, lack of income because you're in school, you're reliant on your parents again, lack of access to facilities, although if your school does have facilities, you may be, one of the solutions might be joining in extracurricular activities at school. Negative attitude toward participation. Again, some children deem participation in some sports cooler than others, or maybe prioritise gaming at home more than they do physical activity. And then we've got school and homework, again, just like the younger children. You've got to prioritise your schoolwork, your revision, and your homework rather than playing sport. Okay. People with disabilities, these could be mental or physical conditions. They could be sensory, visual, autism, or a physical or intellectual disability. So the barriers that people with disabilities face: lack of access to specialist facilities. So disabled people need specific facilities like disabled ramps, disabled parking, disabled showers, disabled changing rooms, lifts, and elevators to get to and from particular locations. It might even be that they're a blind disabled person and they need braille. They might have a lack of transport because they're unable to drive. The program that's on offer to them are not specific to disabled activities. And finally, there might be a lack of confidence or self-esteem. They're feeling quite low about themselves, so therefore don't take up the option to take part in sport. We've got the employed people, or people who work. These are people who are in full-time jobs or even part-time jobs. And people who work face barriers such as, obviously the main one is commitment to their work. They've got to do their contracted hours. They've got a lack of time because they're working. Lack of provision because they may work, nights, and they can't get to they might be sleeping during the day and can't go in the evening at suitable times. Transport issues, some people have to share cars, so potentially there might be some transport issues. And again, I mentioned unsuitable timings of activities. If they're on during the 9 to 5 working hours, they can't go during those times. We've got unemployed people or economically disadvantaged. So these are people who are not in work or don't have a great amount of income left over. And barriers that they face, the main one obviously being lack of disposable income. They've got low income or no income at all. They can't afford the membership fees to take part in sport. Lack of transport, they're probably not going to be able to afford transport or the petrol costs to get to and from sporting facilities. The cost of equipment can be quite expensive, and the cost of memberships can be quite expensive to take part in sport. So therefore can't take part in a particular activity. And there's a lack of awareness of, is there subsidised or cheaper or free activities that unemployed or economically disadvantaged people may not be aware of. So are they aware of, if you're unemployed, you can get this activity for free, or you can get this transport for free. That's another barrier if they're not aware of what is available to them and the cheaper options that are out there. So that sums up part of topic area 1, and we've looked at user groups and we have looked at barriers. The next topic that we will look at solutions to the barriers that we've mentioned today.